India's northeastern region has been grappling with the challenge of drug trafficking since the 1970s, primarily due to the region's proximity to the Golden Triangle. Myanmar is the largest cultivator of opium and producer of heroin globally, just after Afghanistan. Rather, its strategic location within the Golden Triangle, with its overland routes, its porous borders, it enables a smooth flow of illicit substances. The Golden Triangle strategic location, coupled with weak governance and ongoing conflicts in the paths of the region, facilitates the drug trade and makes it a critical focus of international counter narcotics efforts. So, in the northeastern region, smaller militant organizations like the Kanglek Communist Party are directly involved in drug trafficking to generate quick funds.
What do you have to say about China's involvement and how should India look at it?
These sanctions that the China indulges on these ethnic armed groups is in the form of 5 cuts. So, cutting off their electricity, water, internet supply chains, personals. Then India has to have a communication with the Arakan army, with the Chin's defense forces, or else, and the NUG as well, or else projects that Indian government is having is going to suffer. At Indian policy since 2001 2005, then India has always been only engaging with the regime in power. Okay, so it has been engaging with the military junta. India needs to navigate the fine line between enforcement and maintaining the cultural and social cohesion that exists across its northeastern frontier. I think that needs to be really kept in mind.
Things are not well in India's neighbourhood. The turmoil on India's periphery continues to worsen. And being in the region, India of course has to suffer the consequences of the trouble in its neighbourhood, including the recent upheaval caused by Sheikh Hasina's ouster in Bangladesh. But one of these many crises directly impacts India. I'm talking about what has unfolded in Myanmar over the last 4 years, ever since the junta staged a coup in the country and took hold of power. Now, one of the impacts of that crisis has been the influx of Rohingyas into India via Bangladesh. And that's an issue which has been discussed to a great extent. But there is one more problem, caused directly by what's happening inside Myanmar. I'm talking about the illicit drug trade originating in Myanmar. Myanmar is world's second biggest producer of opium after Afghanistan. And this problem is only likely to become more serious going forward. The problem of tons of drugs being smuggled into India, which is a serious cause of concern. To talk about what's fueling this, the struggle between the junta and the rebels, who have to a great extent taken control of Myanmar's border with Bangladesh, and how this illicit drug trade is fueling the crisis in India's northeast. I'm joined by Sriparna Banerjee, who is an associate fellow in the Strategic Studies program at ORF. Her work focuses on geopolitical and strategic affairs concerning 2 Southeast Asian countries, namely Myanmar and Thailand. Her primary focus is on the Rohingya issue within the Bay of Bengal region. Thank you for taking out the time, Ms. Banerjee. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Abhishek.
Now, Myanmar is a small country struggling politically and economically, but a big boy in the world of illicit drug trade. It is the largest cultivator of opium and producer of heroin globally after Afghanistan. In fact, in 2023, Myanmar became the world's top opium producer, with illicit crop cultivation expanding from 99,000 to 116,000 acres. What's leading to this? What's behind this? Before we start talking about the other issues which I spoke about in the introduction, let's please hear from you your thought on this.
Abhishek, I think today the topic is very pertinent because a lot is happening in here, and a lot has been, being dealt between India and Myanmar because of this. So now, like you rightly pointed out, that drug trafficking is a non-traditional, it is basically a security threat that has consequences for public health and safety, and it undermines political stability and economic development. Globally, drug trafficking flows are valued at $650 billion, accounting for 30% of the total illicit economy. Now, India's northeastern region has been grappling with the challenge of drug trafficking since the 1970s, primarily due to the region's proximity to the Golden Triangle. The unfenced porous border that Myanmar border that is there, it facilitates a substantial flow of narcotics into India, impacting the socio-economic fabric of this particular region. Now, as you rightly pointed out, that Myanmar is the largest cultivator of opium and producer of heroin globally just after Afghanistan. Rather, its strategic location within the Golden Triangle, with its overland routes, its porous borders, it enables a smooth flow of illicit substances, making it a big player in the regional drug trade network. These operations are often managed by organized crime groups, ethnic militias, insurgent operations, and military factions, which also engage in other illicit activities such as arms smuggling, money laundering, and human trafficking. So in 2023, like you said, that Myanmar has become the world's top opium producer. It has bypassed Afghanistan in this race. And this rise has intensified, I think, the threat of drug trafficking in the northeastern region as well, since India shares its border with Myanmar. Now, there are a number of reasons why, like you were asking, that why this suddenly there has been an increase in this side of the border. So Myanmar, particularly the regions that are adjacent to Indian borders, that is the Shan state and the Kachin region, they have
Right.
always been growing opium as a part of their livelihood, because opium is a material that they grow, and it gives them they get more sort of money by selling it off with a much, at a much higher rate. And this entire production of drugs actually had reduced while the COVID, during since 2015, when Myanmar started, producing more. It went into more synthetic form of drugs. Like, it started into methamphetamines. It
Methamphetamine.
increased and it went on to grow more popularity. So the ease of producing synthetic drugs compared to heroin, with synthetic drugs requiring less labor and specific environmental conditions, the shift actually turned to less of opium production but more onto the synthetic form of drugs. However, since the COVID hit that side of the border, it became more and more important for the farmers over there to grow more opium production. So because the gate prices already had improved, they have better technology at the moment for growing opium. So right now the farm gate prices are also high. Also, the way these people are growing, the irrigation facilities and the technologies have become much better, so that brings a more boom to opium production in that side of the border.
Right, right. So Myanmar, for all of these reasons that you mentioned, is now becoming a bigger and bigger drug laboratory. I mean, we were talking about opium earlier. Now we're talking about synthetic drugs like methamphetamine. In fact, very recently, the Coast Guard, Indian Coast Guard, seized the biggest, quantity of methamphetamine, and that was just literally last month. Now, having said that, there are a few interesting things that you touched upon, and for the benefit of our viewers, if you can explain those basic things. And let's just start with, of course, the Golden Triangle. What is it? Because as you were saying earlier, it is the location of Myanmar, which also is enabling it to become a bigger and bigger player with each passing day. So if you can explain what is Golden Triangle, and then we will get into the other aspects that you spoke about.
Right. So the Golden Triangle refers to the region where it borders basically Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. They basically converge. So it's in the way it is like a triangle. So it's near the confluence of the Ruak River and the Mekong River. This area is known for its rugged terrain and difficult to access forests, has historically been one of the world's most significant hubs for the cultivation and trafficking of illicit drugs, particularly opium and its derivatives, including heroin. Over time, the region has become a major producer of synthetic drugs, such as the methamphetamine. The Golden Triangle strategic location, coupled with weak governance and ongoing conflicts in the parts of the region, facilitates the drug trade and makes it a critical focus of international counter narcotics efforts.
Right. And the proceeds from these, this drug smuggling is used to fuel the kind of unrest that we recently saw in India's northeast. We are talking about Manipur, of course. If you can talk about that, how this money is being used to not just buy arms, but, also facilitate, what's happening on the ground.
actually, the illicit movement of narcotics and drugs poses multiple threats to national security, because India views this entire thing from a security lens. That is the reason I'm saying that it actually
Yeah.
poses multiple threats to national security. First, it results in breaches of a country's international borders by drug traffickers, which raises concerns about the state's ability to control borders and protect its citizens from external threats. The ease of drug smuggling along these routes may suggest that the same channels could also be used for smuggling arms, explosives, terrorists into the country. Secondly, the money generated from the illegal sale of narcotic drugs, it could be used to finance insurgency and terrorist activities. So, in the northeastern region, smaller militant organizations like the Kanglek Park Communist Party are directly involved in drug trafficking to generate quick funds, while larger organizations such as the NSC, and that is the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, are not
Right.
directly involved in the drug trade, but they are believed to collect protection money from drug peddlers in exchange for the safe passage of drug consignment through their territory. Lastly, drug trafficking harms the economy, public health, and political landscape. So the widespread availability of narcotics, it increases domestic demands, leading to antisocial behavior, which then creates disruption in law and order. Public health is severely impacted with increased rates of addiction, overdoses, and related diseases, which in turn strain healthcare systems. Furthermore, drug trafficking directly impacts the political process, with drug cartels subverting, penetrating, and corrupting state institutions to control the illegal drug trades. So these are the ways, I think, in which it has impacted the Indian side of the border. And the current upheaval in Myanmar, the kind of lawlessness that Myanmar is experiencing as at this moment, actually it has enhanced the trafficking to take place in a more booming industry. But interestingly, if you see the statistics, the UNODC reports, the number of the drugs being caught are not much. They are not as much as it was in 2020. So this shows a lack of what should I say, a lack of surveillance that is still there in that side of the border, because of which such things are not being practiced in the correct manner.
Right, right. And before I, start talking to you about what India's response is at this point in time and how India should respond to this problem in future, because this is, of course, not a small problem, I also want to quickly, understand what's happening in Myanmar. So the recent and the most latest, information, news which is coming out of Myanmar is that, the rebels have, who've been challenging the junta government, have captured a large part, taken control of Myanmar's border with Bangladesh. So if you can talk to us for a little while about what's happening as far as this struggle between the rebels and the junta is concerned.
So right now, Myanmar is undergoing a shift in its political landscape, as we can say, like which is challenging the military regime's long-standing grip on power. So if we look at the trajectory, then since 1962, the military has ruled unchallenged. Initially through direct control, later shifting to semi-democratic government post 2012, and let's say fragile democratic period between 2015 to 2021 coup. The junta likely believed it could quickly consolidate power and suppress resistance as it had during the 1988 uprising and the 2007 Saffron Revolution. However, this time the State Administration Council, or the governing body of the junta, they have been facing an unexpected and powerful opposition, a united front of ethnic armed groups and civilian forces determined to dismantle the military rule. So, what initially I think began as a mass civil disobedience movement has evolved into a broader conflict, showcasing the resilience of the People's Defense Forces, an armed organization of the National Unity Government, that is the shadow government that is currently ruling. It is also joined to some level by the ethnic armed organization, which you spoke about, is the Arakan army and the Chin
Yeah.
Defense Forces. They have demonstrated a united front to hold offensives in the border areas and overthrow military rule. So according to the figures, if we look, then of course the trajectory of change, it currently strongly favors resistance players, as currently the all the strategic border regions are right now controlled by the ethnic armed groups. So right now AA is controlling the whole of Rakhine except the Sitwe, which the military government has actually blocked by bombing the bridge that connects it with the Rakhine state. So right now they are unable to go and what should I say, captivate the Sitwe area. But I'm sure in few days they'll be able to also surpass this sort of difficulty, and they will be able to again rule at that side of the border. So now if you look at what the military is currently, if we look at the scenario, so the current scenario, it suggests that the junta may lose control over more sections, even if it tactically pulls out from isolated centers and it launches counter offensive, which it has done. It has been launching counter offensives, and it has launched in April, it has launched one in September, and it has also launched in August. But in each and every instance, it has not been able to gain back more tracts of land. So right now, the ethnic armed forces are ruling over more, land, and they are controlling the very significant trade centers of the particular nation. So since the EAOs are also divided in their stance of how they want to rule, since they are gaining control, and there is a right now no clear objective as to how they want to rule, because NUG still has a clear mandate. Like, they have said that this is their constitution, they have a ministerial formation, they have done that. However, EAOs are still a little bit confused whether they want to have proper state rules, like they want to rule us as princely states, or do they want to join a federal democratic government. So they are not yet clear about that scenario. So as it may
But
be, it
but
will need
but
to.
as far as the
Yes,
hold of as far as the hold of the military government is concerned, would you say it's waning? Because on one hand, as you were saying, and you explained to us in some detail how hard they are being hit by the rebels. On the other hand, what's happening is just recently the chief prosecutor of International Criminal Court, requested an arrest warrant for the leader of the country's military regime. This has happened 4 years after, of course, a coup, and the charges against him are mostly, primarily two charges, and that is orchestrating two major crimes against humanity, namely the deportation and, of course, persecution of the Rohingya Muslims. So, on the other hand, this is what is being done internationally to put pressure on, the military regime in Myanmar.
that's correct. But however, let me quickly point this out that ICC is basically a very it doesn't have a hold on the military to actually adhere to what they are trying to make them do. So they do not have a legal control over the military government, because the military government has denied these charges, and they have said that they are not holding this as a correct way of viewing them. And China is also supporting this cause, and actually they have said that they may not. So it's kind of voluntarily, if they want to be held accountable, they will be held accountable, because ICC cannot hold you responsible legally in some ways, right? So you
Yeah.
have to, there needs to be a political will also at place for you to come up and become accountable to this severe crime that has happened with the Rohingyas, that within this part of the nation. And Rakhine is a place where it is Rohingyas who have been living for several decades, and
Yeah.
still they are getting persecuted, as the military government has also conscription laws, and they have actually used the Rohingyas to as and use them to build an army out of them, and they are playing Rohingyas against the AA right now, and that is again causing a lot of difficulties in this side of the border, since AA wants to rule, and again it is being placed by a difficult sort of a trajectory where they want to rule. However, they have to keep the Rohingyas also, because they know that at the international, if they look at the international way of seeing things, then internationally Rohingyas are getting more, they have got more prominence, and A wants to rule, taking with them the Rohingyas as well. So right now I think A
Right.
is also in a dilemma, and they have to also think how they want to go about this in future.
But despite China's support for the military regime, things economically, at least in Myanmar, are so bad that professionals like doctors, nurses, are having to resort to a prostitution. So, in other words, we are talking about a society which is economically so weak that a common citizen perhaps has no hopes of surviving. In such a scenario, do you think more and more people will perhaps join ranks with the rebels?
Yes, and that is actually happening, because they are. What is happening actually is that there are EAOs, and there are also the People's Defense Army, which is there, which is
Yeah,
of NUG. So the local people are trying to join the People's Defense Forces, not the EAOs at the moment, but the EAOs that are based in the border regions. The locals are joining the EAOs then in this part, because they see the
right.
EAOs as the heroes, because they want to experience freedom, and the EAOs are striving for autonomy, and they are striving for independence, and that is why the citizens within, I'm talking about the border regions, they are joining the EAOs. But if we talk about the
Right.
city level things that is happening in Napito and Mogdo, then they are being joined by the citizens who are there in the urban regions.
And another problem that it poses for India is the fact that China, of course, has made major inroads into Myanmar, and it is backing the military regime in Myanmar. And as per some recent reports that I was going through before the interview, now China, to protect its infrastructure, against this attack by the rebels, is
Hmm.
planning to sort of, set up some sort of a joint force with the military regime in Myanmar and have military presence in Myanmar, just like it has in Pakistan to safeguard its assets. So, from that perspective, what do you have to say about China's involvement, and how should India look at it? Because I think at this point in time in the interview, let's start talking about India's response to this crisis.
Right. So, if you look at how China is making its inroads, then it's quite interesting, because, in contrast to Western formal sanctions, China opts for more discreet measures to maintain an image of a steady development while exerting its economic pressure to protect its interests. So, these sanctions that they have, because they also maintain a relationship with the ethnic armed groups as well in that side of the border. So, Operation 1027, the main
Yeah,
three brotherhood alliance, are also pally with the Chinese government, right?
yeah,
So these sanctions that the China indulges on these ethnic armed groups is in the form of five cuts. So cutting off their electricity, water, internet supply chains, personals. So there is restriction on trade and movement. It aims to influence target nations or groups to align with China's strategic objectives, particularly when its sovereignty is perceived as threatened. So, China has enforced border closures, economic sanctions, mainly targeting the Kokang forces in Lashio and other EAOs, like also the Kachin Independence Army,
gotcha.
the KIAs. So, these measures are primarily driven by concerns over the expanding military influence of these groups following Operation 1027. So, as a result of the growing control over key Myanmar China border trade routes, these groups have enhanced their geopolitical leverage as well. Because, in the northern Shan and central Myanmar region, there are 10 Chinese investment projects that are ongoing, and they have been planned, which are right now completely under the control of the EAOs and the PDFs. So even the KIA had seized some important border towns also, which house vital rare earth materials, which are used by China to make its electronics and electrical vehicle industries. So these are also a part which is also something which China wants to get back. So viewing these developments as threats to its infrastructural needs and economic gains, China employs a carrot and stick approach, I would call it, simultaneously pressurizing the EAOs while supporting SAC that it's doing right now through diplomatic and military backing, including endorsing their election plan. So it has recently said that it will be going to
Yeah.
endorse. So now Beijing also warned and put pressure on the Tang National Liberation, that is the another part of the Three Brotherhood Alliance, the MNDAA, by inviting them for dialogue, and simultaneously it kept on using the five-cut policy to ensure compliance. It has also threatened the war leaders, which it has a very close alliance with. So these measures, they reflect China's intent to curb EAO power and shape Myanmar's political landscape to safeguard its strategic interests. And now also creating a military base in Myanmar is going to be very, very difficult for India to manage, because recently there were reports that the Wanbao region, there was again, I think it was one of the EAOs that were going to take over the Wanbao, that site, and
Mhm.
there were military personnel within the China center of the Wanbao that had come to fight it. So it is already happening. So though they
Yeah.
have already said that they are trying to create bases, but bases are already there, and there are militants of China who are protecting these projects as well. And
Yeah.
such a security dynamics is not going to play well with Indian side. But having said so, I would also like to mention this, that India is also trying to not engage in this manner with the ethnic armed groups, but yes, it is opening its channel with the ethnic armed groups. Because if India has to make its inroads, and if India wants to protect its own projects that are ongoing in this part of the area, then India has to have a communication with the Arakan army, with the Chin's defense forces, or else, and the NUG as well, or else projects that Indian government is having is going to suffer. So Indian
Yeah, I
government is
mean,
actually opening
because
channel.
you know
Yes.
it's very unfortunate. I mean, we're talking about India's response, and so far, I mean, in terms of whether it is about the when Rohingyas were forced out, India was responding to that crisis. Now we're talking about the drug smuggling, and then of course India has I mean, I wouldn't say caught napping, but at the same time we know the quantum of drugs being seized versus the quantum drugs which are being actually smuggled. I mean, experts like you have been saying that what the amount of drugs seized represent perhaps the tip of the iceberg. So that's a second crisis. And then third, of course, is China's increasing presence. And China, like a clever and agile puppet master, is, has these alliances, as you were talking about earlier, with all the important players in Myanmar. And India, on the other hand, what is India's response? We're talking about building a boundary, along the India-Myanmar border. I mean, it's thousands of kilometers long, and it's going to happen in a bunch of years. So, do you think, I mean, India has been slow in terms of how it's been responding to what's happening in Myanmar?
It is, I think. It initially it applied a wait and watch mode, I think. So it was
Yeah.
mostly waiting and watching what is happening in that side of the border rather than responding to it or coming up and telling it. However, having said this, India also had been only engaging with the since let me go back a little and let me say that Indian policy, if you look
Yeah.
at Indian policy since 2001, 2005, then India has always been only engaging with the regime in power. Okay, so it has been engaging with the military junta because it felt that earlier during 1988, when the previous government was ruling, not the BJP government, the earlier government was ruling, and India was very proactive in supporting the cause of the democratic rule, and it really started creating its differences with the military regime. Then a lot of security issues that were happening on this side of the border, they did not get any help from the Myanmar junta, which actually kept on controlling the security angles of that side of the border. So Indian government had this policy very clear that they will only engage with the, after that actually, Indian government had a very clear policy that they will engage with the regime in power no matter who that regime is, despite whether there is a democratic channel there or not. So what Indian government did after that is Indian government has always been only nudging the junta, who clearly seems not politically at will to, make some changes on this side of the border or to have a federal democracy. Because if you look at the junta's response, then junta has recently, I think, it has in the last week of September, it actually opened its channels of peace with the ethnic armed groups. But however, the ethnic armed groups have initially declined, and they said that they do not want to enter into this, and they wanted that military to hold themselves responsible for this thing. However, now due to again China's pressure that China is exerting in this policy of five cuts, and it has also recently come out that MNDA is the main leader, is right now taken as a hostage in China for these for the ethnic armed group to actually start
Negotiating. Yes.
with the with the Myanmar government. So these negotiation might go on, but we don't know to what extent this is going to actually change any fabric within Myanmar, because right now as we see it, the the
So
armed
in other
groups
words,
are, yeah,
in other words, the policy that
yes.
India has done two things, and neither of those two things have really served India's cause. But having said that, what will you say about the, if you were to highlight what the India's response has been to this crisis, and let that be the last question to you. So please take it away and talk to us about India's larger response to this crisis.
Right. So, if we talk about the drug trafficking part, then India has been actively engaging in combating drug trafficking with Myanmar. These efforts are aimed at addressing the illicit trade of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, as well as related offenses. So India has undertaken various measures. It has been signing MOUs and bilateral agreements with Myanmar. There is some sort of intelligence sharing and controlled delivery operations. Like controlled delivery operations, they involve coordinated efforts to intercept and seize illicit drug shipments, thereby disrupting trafficking networks. India has also organized general level talks with Myanmar to address drug related issues with international implications. Furthermore, the NCB, or the Narcotics Control Bureau, it regularly engages with the Central Committee of Drug Abuse Control, that is CCDAC of Myanmar, through field level officer meetings at the international border. Now, these meetings, they facilitate discussions and resolutions on drug related issues in both countries, enhancing cooperation in combating drug trafficking. So recently, the seventh Myanmar India bilateral meeting on drug control, it was hosted in January 2024, and it sought to tackle the growth of drug trade and the importance of international and regional collaboration to curb the issue. Now, chemical seizures, as I was just talking a bit back, it reported by Myanmar, it predominantly involves non-controlled substances, and it rarely include key precursors or pre-precursors of methamphetamine. So whether internationally scheduled or not, most of these chemicals appear to be smuggled into the country or diverted in special regions, for example, the Shan state. So in
Yeah.
2023, only 80,000 of pseudoephedrine tablets were seized, compared to 3.1 million tablets in 2022, and none in the previous years. So this gap actually in law enforcement, it clearly indicates the needs to be mitigated. There needs to be better laws between both the nations. That is not happening at this moment. Now, to effectively address the drug problem, it is important to prioritize the control of precursor chemicals essential for drug production. Now, Myanmar plans to enhance its cooperation with neighboring countries as well, because this is not an Indian problem alone. It is happening in its side of the border. So Thailand is affected, Bangladesh is affected very severely for this issue. So there needs to be a multilateral forum at place. There is, we know, the BIMSTEC platform which is there. There is also ASEAN platform which is there, that India is also trying to use. However, India's engagement in ASEAN's regional efforts on drug matters, particularly through the ASEAN Senior Officials on Drug Matters platform, has been limited. So, increased participation in ASEAN initiatives could enhance India's strategies and effectiveness in combating drug trafficking within the region, as well as I think India. One part that you shared is that India has discontinued its FMR, and it is trying to put fence along its border.
Yeah.
However, this has been severely objected by the state governments, because it creates channels of actually having more illicit pathways across its border,
Mhm.
potentially creating more opportunities for unlawful crossings into India. So I think Indian government needs to have this in mind, that while enhancing security and curbing illegal activities, India needs to navigate the fine line between enforcement and maintaining the cultural and social cohesion that exists across its northeastern frontier. I think that needs to be really kept in mind. Also, there is a nexus. India has, despite the fact that India has made strides to control this drug trafficking, law enforcement and criminal justice agencies must prioritize preventing corruption and misconduct in drug control efforts. So
Right.
agencies vulnerable to corruption should adopt regular appraisals, conflict of interest disclosures, then asset and gift declaration, and robust procedures to ensure accurate reporting. And confidential reporting of suspicious activities should be encouraged, with effective investigations conducted by Internal Affairs Department or independent oversight bodies, because it is at the end of the day people who are supposed to protect this are complicit with this. So I think this is one thing that needs to be looked into. And of course, enhanced protection for whistleblowers and witnesses is also very, very important, because though there are arrests that are happening, but largely they are not kingpins who are being arrested. They are only peddlers who are working for some money. So actually there needs to be proper protection, and since there is lack of clear laws to how to handle these people who are arrested also, they are being sent away. So not much is being done. I think these are
Right.
some of the areas where work needs to be more done. Though Indian government has come a long way, it needs to work a little more, be more careful and efficient, since that side of the border is right now very volatile. And Indian neighbors, I think if you look at the whole neighborhood, it is quite volatile at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And which is what I started the interview with. I mean, just
Right.
by the virtue of the fact that, I mean, we are where we are geographically and on the peripheries of the country. I mean, whether you look at Pakistan, you look at Bangladesh, you look at Myanmar, you look at Sri Lanka, there's trouble everywhere, to varying degrees. And India, of course, needs to be cautious. But having said that, before I let you go, one quick question, and that is if you would want to comment on the quantum of the drug smuggling, if there are any numbers that you can share with us.
Right now, if you look at the scenario, I think very vague numbers have actually been reported. If you
Yeah.
look at it very clearly, then currently, if you look into the 2022-2023 alone, then contraband worth of 267 million US dollars were recovered from the northeastern region. So, and something around more than $238 billion drugs were also covered from the Manipur, Mizoram, that border area also. So I think very vague figures are there,
You
but
mean
I think again,
238 million? You mean
yes,
$238 million, right?
$1 million, sorry, not billion, right?
Yeah.
So what we get is very snippets of figures that are there, but there is more to this, and I think the data of that is quite lacking, because what we have with us is only the drugs which are being caught, but the drugs which are not being caught, the data is much
Yeah,
more
because the
over there.
numbers, when I was looking at the numbers, they don't really make sense because when you talk about, global at the global level drug smuggling, you're talking about, the amount of money that you're talking about is upwards of $600 billion. Now, when you talk about, the kind of seizures we've seen
Right.
here, and of course the quantum which has been referred to very vaguely, as you mentioned in all the reports that have come out, we're talking about a few $100 million. So there is no semblance between the kind of numbers that we
Absolutely.
see because at the same time,
No.
right in the beginning, as I said, and you also sort of, mentioned that Myanmar is, of course, right at the top when it comes to opium production, cultivation, and of course, smuggling. On that note, though, thank you for taking out the time, Ms. Banerjee, and thank you for explaining the situation to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for having me today. I hope I could give some insights.